G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day. So far you're having a fantastic week. Now I am filming this video earlier in the day than usual. Usually I wait into the afternoon before I film in case any important updates pop up. But I'm actually heading home because I'm hosting my high school's 10-year reunion. So I've got an 8-hour drive this afternoon. Sadly, medically, I'm not allowed to drive, so poor Lily has to drive me 8 hours to go to my high school reunion, but I'm the host of it now. I haven't been in the car yet, so strap in for the nausea. So if I do miss anything, I do apologise, and I'll catch up tomorrow where I'll be making a video probably from my parents' kitchen. But it will be nice to go back home for a bit. Now, legends, of course, today we have a lot to go over. We're going to look at the maps and some geolocated footage, as a large envelopment has now closed up. Of course, we're talking about the pocket around Ilininka-Uspenivka area, and geolocated footage has shows that closed, and the deep state map updated about 5 minutes ago. So we've got that one at least, and we'll compare some others. I want to look over some new weapons being used, some weapons that have gone into Russia, as well as the claims around what has been hit there, and just some footage of the day that I find relevant. But the main point of the video, and what you're probably going to be reading in the title, is Zelensky basically saying, as clearly as I've seen, he's hinted at this before, but clearly saying Ukraine does not have the military power to take back areas in the Donbass and Crimea, that it has to be done another way. Now, we have heard messaging similar to this, but this is very straight down the line. And I think a lot of this is just putting in place expectations for when the Trump administration comes in, if the war ends. But the question, which I'm thinking is going to be in the title, is why do we just assume that Putin will stop the war? That's just an assumption that if something's put on the table to stop, that he will then accept it. And I will say that I've been in that train of thinking before too, but I've been thinking, well, why is this? So we're going to answer that, and we're going to look at because there's this idea of what's going to break first. One side think that Russia will economically collapse before Ukraine's military does, and the other side believe that Ukraine militarily will collapse before the Russian economy collapses. So we're going to answer those questions. Also, what I forgot in the introduction is we're going to look at more that has come out about Lieutenant General Kirilyov, of course, head of Russia's CBRN. We're going to talk about that assassination, what President Trump's Ukrainian envoy has said, as well as what the FSB has also released. But let's start here with this. So we have from Rostov region said to be targeting the Taganrog metallurgic plant, that there are ATACMS or Storm Shadow strikes. Now, Russian pages are saying that there was 10 ATACMS intercepted. Ukrainian pages saying there's Storm Shadows, and you can hear some strikes in this footage. Again, all this footage is going to be on the Telegram if you'd like, but we have no confirmation at this point in time, none of what actually has happened here or what has or has not been struck. We have a little bit of footage coming out from the Russian side, and this clearly does show a Storm Shadow or a Scalp, same, in a field here that has definitely been intercepted. So at least one has been intercepted. I've seen Russian pages saying that 10 were intercepted. When we have intercepted missiles, I actually think it's probably if you've seen the American Pie movies, the ratio of when a ex-girlfriend or an ex-boyfriend says if they've, been with anyone else, that you either times it by 3 or divide it by 3. So if it's been 100, well, you probably divide that by 3 of the interception, and ones that have gone, well, you can times it. I think those rules probably apply when we look at the informational space around what is intercepted and what has also been fired successfully. So let's have a look at this. Of course, we have fighter bomber has said that a Kar-52, of course, a Russian attack helicopter, has been downed there. He's saying, at least preliminary, by a Russian SAM. At this point, it's a surface-to-air missile. So I actually believe at this point in time, there's probably been more choppers over the past 12 months downed by Russia's own AD than Ukrainian AD. Someone run the numbers on this. Rostec, of course, who build a lot of Russian military equipment, they have released this footage here through TASS, but this is a UGV, so a ground-operated MOL drone that can carry supplies or even in some cases can be a one-way attack kamikaze, but this is very interesting. Of course, we've seen the last few months the fibre optic drones enter the battlefield, the UAVs, but now we're seeing fibre optic controlled UGVs, which is very interesting as well. Wait for more confirmation on those being used in the battlefield. We also have a Ukrainian Mi-8 chopper here being filmed downing a Russian Garan drone, of course, an analogue of a Iranian Shahed. So we see this down here. Now, we know a lot of these are carrying dud warheads just to distract AD, but this one definitely isn't. We can see with the impact on the ground there. Actually, it could be, it depends on the fuel and the source, but we see that one down by a chopper. We've seen more and more actions of that. Now, Lieutenant General Kurakhove was assassinated, as well as his assistant outside of an apartment in Moscow. We talked about this at length yesterday, and some people's opinions have been wild on this, and there's been a lot of hate going towards a lot of creators online. Preston Stewart, a creator of which sometimes I agree with, sometimes I respectfully disagree with. Either way, really lovely guy, has got that much hate over spreading his opinion, which lines up with the international humanitarian law online, that he's had to block his Twitter and turn off the comments, which is so common in this war of any differing opinion, even if it lines up with something that he's written in stone that everyone wants to see to, the amount of hate towards that. And it just stops any rational discussion about things. So I hate that has occurred to someone as nice as himself. But the FSB has released this footage, or allegedly released this, of a Uzbek citizen saying this: I came to Moscow on an assignment from the Ukrainian Special Services. I bought an electric scooter. After a few months, I received components for an explosive device. I accepted those as well. And then further, I prepared everything in place, the scooter with the explosives, near the general's house. When I left the house, pressed the button, and they offered $100,000 and a European passport. That is what he said of why he has done this. And the FSB has released this footage saying that that is the arrest being made. Again, it's very hard to know exactly what is happening here. As I was told overnight by dear friends, nothing in Russia is as it seems. And he said there's probably going to be a bit more come out of exactly what has occurred with this assassination of such a high-ranking member. But US General Keith Kellogg, of course, nominated as Ukraine's peace envoy by President-elect Donald Trump, who's in very soon, he has criticised this assassination. And of course, we know Kurakhove and his assistant were killed. The Ukrainian SBU has claimed responsibility, calling him a war criminal. Kellogg said the incident was a potential violation of the rules of war, however, emphasising that it does not obstruct possible negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. Kellogg acknowledged Kurakhove's targeting could be seen as legitimate given the accusations against him. However, he cautioned that killing military officers in their hometowns may escalate tensions. Of course, Trump wants to de-escalate things and end the war, saying when you kill admirals or generals in their hometown, it's kind of like you're extending it, and I don't think that's a smart thing to do. He added the alleged use of a mercenary in Kurakhove's assassination, who we've just shown you, is not a good idea at all. Russian security services, of course the FSB, have detained two suspects over that occurring. But let's talk about military power, Viktor Orban, and head of the office of the president, Andriy Yermak, and how there's been so much change of the messaging about this war. And the question I said in the beginning of why would Putin stop? Economically, Russia is looking a lot better than many have thought and many have reported. I shared with you over the past couple of days, NATO Secretary Mark Rutte is basically saying that Russia's economy and industry is performing beyond what they were expecting and is gearing up, and in a few years will be a real military threat to NATO, which is completely opposite of what has been said. And then if you've listened to what I've been saying over the past couple of weeks and sharing parts of different podcasts with experts on things, that saying if Ukraine is on an irreversible path to NATO membership, which we have heard from many different leaders around the world, NATO, EU, everything, the question then becomes, well, why would Putin then stop taking land, knowing that whatever is left is going to join NATO, which is the one thing that Russia has been completely, Putin has been completely the same on throughout the entire war, is joining that there has been goalpost shift in other aspects, but that has been the same. And as Professor Mearsheimer has said, this idea of that it's an irreversible path to NATO, this incentivizes Putin to continue the war. And before we get into this, in my honest opinion, based on years of following the war and my knowledge in attritional warfare, the battle is widely accepted by both sides that it's between Russia's economy and industry and and Ukraine's military, and who will break first. Economy, industry, one side, Ukraine's military, who will break first, and people come up with arguments that can point in either direction. Now, in my opinion, Ukraine looks to break militarily well before Russia does economically. People will say things like, in 2026, Russia will blah, 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 which is what we heard in 2022 about 2023 about 2024, and 2024 about 2025. And look, I have no doubt that things will start hitting harder, but the thing with sanctions is it hits slow, then it hits quick, and then it tapers off again when other avenues are then found. But with how things are looking on the battlefield, do we think that, okay, if Russia's economy is going to really take a hit in 2026, do we really think that Ukraine militarily has until 2026 with how things are going around manpower, morale, and even Western support going in? And seeing the reservation to mobilise and the timeframes given to train those mobilised soldiers, once that even happens, if it even happens, that brings in a lot of doubt for myself. So with a French newspaper, this is why I want to talk about this, from La Parisienne. Now this is about a day old, but I didn't see it yesterday. Titled, "We Must Put Putin in His Place." Volodymyr Zelensky to our readers. Zelensky has a war to fight. In Ukraine, bad news has been coming thick and fast on the front lines since the end of the summer. On Monday, Vladimir Putin claimed the liberation of 189 Ukrainian localities in 2024. His tanks are at the gates of a large mining city of Pokrovsk. We're going to go over the situation in Pokrovsk in a second in full. In less than a month, the Ukrainian head of state will also have to deal with Donald Trump. The president-elect of the US regularly promises to stop the war, saying it's carnage. He protested on Monday, calling on his Ukrainian counterpart to talk to Putin. American military aid threatens to dry up. In front of the readers of La Parisienne, gathered by video conference, Volodymyr Zelensky bangs his fist on the table. He said he is said to be ready to make territorial concessions in exchange for peace. No one speaks for him. Neither on independence of Ukraine nor on Putin, who must be put in his place. He says, jaws clenched, he hammers home the urgency of joining NATO to ensure the security of Ukraine. So what we'll see in this is, again and again, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky saying no one speaks for Ukraine. It cannot be done without Ukraine's involvement in this. And this is going to go over what is occurring between NATO and EU member Hungary and their leader Viktor Orban and Ukraine at the moment. So this is the idea of, if we don't stop Putin, he'll continue to destroy us. But for the war, they ask, is this what you say in Ukraine to those who would like it to stop? And he does say, Zelensky says, that there is great fatigue after the 3 years of war, especially in times when the support of some countries begins to fail. But Ukraine is also united. They defend their country. Representatives of other countries would tell you we must come to an agreement with the aggressor. How can we come to agreement? The aggressor must bear responsibility. This is the idea of, you can't let that might is right be the way forward, although history will show that has been again and again. Even if it is wrong, it has been what history has shown. We don't know what the other way is. We all want the war to end as soon as possible, and we'll do everything possible to achieve this. We'll resort to diplomacy, but this does not mean forgiving Putin. We'll not forgive because we respect international law. We cannot legitimise the occupation. The country must answer for what has committed. Without justice, there'll be no victory. The thing is with this, what many will say, and I agree with, is yes, there is a respect for international law UN Charter, but it can't be one or the other. It can't be nitpicking this, and this, because there are parts that Ukraine is well outside of the international law on, like General Krylov, like the mines, like the OPCW, CWC as well. So it needs to be all or nothing. And this is why I criticise Turkey so heavily, is you can't be in NATO for this and not in NATO for that. And of course, Russia is well outside of international law and humanitarian laws on many aspects as well. You talk about a diplomatic solution to stop the war. What compromises would you be willing to make? Give up, even temporarily, Crimea or the Donbass? Zelensky says we cannot give up our territories. The Ukrainian constitution forbids us to do so. De facto, these territories are now controlled by the Russians. We do not have the strength to regain them. So militarily saying they do not have the strength to regain them. We can only count on diplomatic pressure from the international community to force Putin to come to the negotiating table, which I don't get. I don't get what more the international community can do to put that pressure on Russia to force Putin to come to the table with what has already been applied. And at the same time, America trying not to force Russia straight into the arms of Xi Jinping and China as well. I'm surprised. Why is the West, which supports us, taking such care of him? Why from the beginning of the war were we not massively armed? Where in the beginning there was a huge concern around corruption and the speed of the Russian offensive. And further on, well, we have seen that now with massively arming Ukraine, there has been a lot of pushback on, well, you need to mobilise more people before that can occur. My speech may seem insolent, but I have the impression that everyone is terrified of Putin's Russia. He's living in impunity. We need a strong America and strong Europe to put pressure on Russia to stop the war. But again, no one has ever said like what pressure can be applied to make Putin come to the negotiating table other than military victories on the front line, which Zelensky says here that they do not have the power to do. And we talk about this idea of the whole world letting him go and give up joining EU and NATO, he's asked. Well, how can we imagine that Ukrainian people, not me, chose to be a full-fledged state of the European Union? Again, it'll be interesting to see when there are democratic elections again held in Ukraine, or when they are held in Ukraine, to see what exactly comes of this. I believe they should have been held a year ago, and still to this day should be backed by the US of this, even if it is a limited plebiscite of some sort. Why does the whole world let him do it? The US, China, India, the European Union, I don't understand. And give up NATO? What are we offered in return? We're aware of the dangers and challenges. Who can guarantee that Putin will not return to Ukraine? So saying if this isn't put in, if we are not in NATO, then Putin will just come back, and calling out US, China, India and the EU for letting Putin do it, which I vehemently disagree with, that they've let Putin do it. There have been sanctions beyond what was expected applied against Russia, and hundreds of billions of dollars given to Ukraine, and training and everything else, including all the informational space as well. Which country will come to our aid with its planes and troops? Today, we only have bilateral guarantees with our partners on military and financial support. But if Putin returns with millions of men, will we defend ourselves alone again? Will we witness the death of our women and children? The question is not to join NATO, but ensure our security. So again, if we're not in NATO, Putin's just going to come back again, and no one is going to step in for us. Does Putin's threat to use nuclear weapons scare you? Do you think that he's capable of it? And again, this talk about nuclear weapons, this is what I call, there's the Manpower Paradox, and then there's the Putin Paradox. People say he's a dictator that has lost his mind, he can't be reasoned with, he's irrational, all of this, whilst at the same time, we are told that his nuclear threats are empty, and that we trust him with these nuclear weapons and rational enough not to do this, because it would end this and this and this. But on the other side saying, well, he's completely irrational, he's lost his mind as a dictator, which I say, these are not mutually exclusive. It's either one or the other. And I believe the US, they know they can go, well, realistically, we don't think he's going to fire one, therefore we are willing to fire in Storm Shadow. Because if they truly believed that he's an irrational dictator, crazy, lost his mind with a death wish, it'd probably be seen that, well, he may actually push the button on these. Zelensky says only fools are afraid of weapons. Vladimir Putin has lost his mind. His missiles prove it. So again, this goes into this paradox. His threats should scare the whole world. There is talk of a nuclear war. All possible sanctions should be taken to prevent any leader from even thinking about it. Again, you can't sanction against ICBMs. Unfortunately, we do not see enough firm reactions to him, of course, to Putin. Now, let's have a look at this. Could you yourself sit down in front of Vladimir Putin and negotiate with him? Now, Ukraine has said before that no, they will not negotiate with Putin. There is a new leader in Russia before that. But Zelensky says what matters is not the person opposite to you, it's what state you're in when you negotiate. I do not consider that we're in a position of weakness, but we are not in a position of strength either. Now, I disagree with that. Ukraine's definitely not in a position of strength, but at the moment, with what I'm seeing on the front line, with it moving, Ukraine is in a position of weakness and Russia is in a position of strength. I think that is objectively true. There's certain areas you could look at of strengths and weaknesses, yes, but as far as on a whole, I believe that to be true. Are we in NATO? We do not know. Well, you're not. Will we be part of the European Union? Yes, in the future, but when? Sitting down at the table with Putin under these conditions would mean giving him the right to decide everything in our part of the world. Now, again, I think Zelensky answers his own question here. Why then would Putin stop? Because if he does, it will put Ukraine in a position of power, because then Ukraine will join NATO, then Ukraine will join the EU, and Ukraine will be in a position of power for diplomacy on those occupied areas and other bits and pieces. So again, like I spoke about, like Mersheimer has said, that then it incentivizes Putin to actually continue because, well, if this is irreversible that it's happening, I need to take as much as possible. First, we must establish a model of an action plan or a peace plan. So Zelensky's basically saying we need a position of strength, which could be we're in NATO, we're in the EU, and that would force Russia to come, and we would be in a position of strength for negotiating. But I've said I don't think any of that will come until there is the guns fall silent, which when the guns fall silent, if it is in a couple of weeks, Russia will be coming to that in a position of power. And I think if the guns fall silent and there's occupied pieces of land, that land is gone. I think people know that, but aren't willing to exactly say it. Then can we submit to Putin or more broadly to the Russians? I insist no. No leader in the world has the right to hold talks with Putin without Ukraine. So he's saying no leader in the world has a right to hold talks with Putin without Ukraine. We have never delegated this mandate to anyone. We are the victims. So saying no one can talk to Putin without them, which of course isn't happening. We've seen Orban on multiple times. He has said on Twitter, the possibility of a mass prisoner exchange with and a Christmas ceasefire is on the table. It doesn't matter how it got there, it is there. So he's saying, don't ask how it's got there, but it's there. If you want a mass prisoner exchange and a Christmas ceasefire, it's there. There are two things to do with it. Accept it or reject it. One party has accepted it, while the other has apparently rejected it. So he's saying Russia has accepted, Ukraine has rejected. But there are still several days until Christmas. Let's hope for the best. Now, this is not going to occur. We've seen Viktor Orban as well respond to Zelensky saying, who else in Europe has such experience as Ukraine? No one. Does Orban have such an army? No. How would he put pressure on Putin? With a joke or a smile, he can keep it. So how is this actually made of a deal? With Orban saying, don't ask how it got there, I guess. I'd like to know how it got there. But Orban has responded to this going, we will not respond to any provocation. There is a ceasefire proposal on the table. Take it or leave it. It's your responsibility. And then Zelensky here talks about sovereignty, about that they are the victims. Would it be unfair to anyone started telling us how a country should live? The French in France, Italians in Italy, or the Americans in the United States? No, they want for themselves. The Ukrainians too. What I will say is don't say the French for France, Italians for Italy. Don't say that in a university campus or maybe in the Western media. Asking if the war continues, does it mean that we are helping Ukraine too much? On the contrary, it's because there is not enough aid. So saying if the war keeps going, then there's not enough aid, therefore we're not in a position of power and able to end. You regularly go to the front. What is the state of mind of the troops? Do your soldiers still believe in victory? We're going to look at what the soldiers are saying in Pokrovsk later in this video. They believe in Ukraine and they want a victory. This is undeniable. The soldiers at the front are heroic people who are exhausted today, especially where replacements are long overdue. I give the moment support actually arrives, given 6 months to a year, so that support, the military aid is coming in slow. It happens that these weapons are old or in poor conditions. All this is an impact on the morale of the military. But what I'll say, stop shifting blame. Zelensky, you are the president of the country. Yes, you are reliant on military aid and training from other countries, but you yourself, you're in charge of rotation and demobilisation laws, which have not been put in place, which people have been screaming for months, if not years, as well as you're in charge of mobilising more men to fill the manpower gaps, to improve morale of what people are asking for, and the replacements on the front line also. I think we're going to see more and more of just shifting blame onto particularly the US, as a lot of the world does for any problem, rather than the military aid has problems. Yes, absolutely. But we have problems mobilising and recruiting as well. These are not one and the other. It's all hand in hand. This is connected. Now, talking on mobilisation, here, and we'll look over the full answer because it's different. You recently lowered the age of mobilisation from 27 to 25. How do young people react? Do you plan to go further? He says, the younger the people are, the more physically vigorous they are. It's important to preserve our youth. Modern warfare is not only trench and assault rifles, but also aviation and drones. We must strengthen a technological component of our army. This is a modern warfare can be won. Our partners must invest in strengthening our capabilities, but we must have the most modern and comprehensive air defence possible. I'm sometimes told there's not enough power in the West to produce these systems in time because they're already being deployed, and there are not many available. Very well, give us the licenses to build this equipment, the missiles and the systems. The thing that I say with this is the Manpower Paradox. The more men you have fighting at the front line and the more trained and experienced they are, the less then you will lose. And if this war is existential, like we hear, and I believe that this war is existential for Ukraine, he talks about to preserve the youth, you must fight. This is the paradox, though, is to preserve the youth of the country. Those youth then need to fight to preserve themselves. Does that make sense? Because if they're not mobilised, things are going to get worse. And if they are mobilised, there's the potential of things get better. And this is the problem. And what I say is, if Ukraine doesn't mobilise, they go to the negotiating table, and Putin doesn't stop, he goes, I'm not interested in that. What then? Because then you're still at least 12 months away from, even if you go, shit, we need to mobilise now, having those mobilisation figures and the ability to negotiate, ability to mobilise at the negotiating table would do a lot. And at the end of the day, my experience as a soldier is the soldiers 18 to 25, that's where your main fighting force typically is. Yes, Ukraine has lower numbers in there, but still, as he confirms himself, these are more vigorous fighting. So it is a bit of a paradox in here between the more you mobilise, the less losses you will have. And my question is, he always talks about the youth of the country going forward and how we need to protect these younger people. And what I ask is, well, if the losses are so low as we hear, because you speak as if we're sacrificing the youth of the country if we mobilise them. But I thought there was only in the tens of thousands of losses. Does that make sense? That if you're saying if we mobilise them, we are sacrificing the youth of the country, well, that in turn it doesn't sound like you're having the losses of which we hear again and again. Does that make sense? Press reports that Ukraine has provided assistance to the Syrian rebellion. Is it the case? He said we don't have any official information in this regard, but we do have some other confirmations by Ukrainian media allegedly talking to Ukrainian intelligence officials, but I am not surprised to see Ukraine deny that from the president. France spends money on Ukraine. Explain to me why we should continue to support you. If the war continues, it does not mean that we are helping Ukraine too much. On the contrary, because there is not enough aid, we are grateful for what we have received. We must be helped even more. This is an investment in the defence of Europe. If Ukraine loses, Russia will attack other European countries, including NATO members. This is inevitable. It will advance even faster because it will be aware of having defeated one of the most seasoned armies on the European continent. Since 2014 and the first occupations of the territories, we have acquired war experience that, he says most, but I'll say more experience than war experience that all European armies do not have. The only people with conventional, protracted attritional warfare experience is Russia and Ukraine. That's it. And, some individuals who have gone to fight from other areas of the globe, but realistically that is it. But what I say here is, this again is what we hear, that Russia is going to have the power to attack NATO and the EU. Therefore, the economic and industry, this doesn't line up with the other messaging about the collapse of all of this very soon and Ukraine's ability to push that back. If Russia truly is going to have the power to attack European countries and NATO, then it's not going to be stopped here it's not going to be stopped here. Now, what I will say is Russia's threat to NATO and Europe is not military. It's ideology. That's the threat to Europe. And you see with that interview I shared yesterday before between Professor Mearsheimer and Dugan, they both accept Russia does not have, and is not going to have, the military might to have an attack on NATO. And they know this. And I believe the command 100% know this. But what I say is it's ideological, is the threat that Europe and the US is seeing. And the ideology is of conservative traditionalism That's where the threat actually is to European states, is people who are sick of the progressive liberal ideas looking towards more conservative, traditional, say, right-wing or illiberalist ideas. That's where I think the threat is actually being felt by strategists, isn't militarily, it's ideologically, and people may be shifting their views over the next decade or more. As well as, of course, the stranglehold Russia does have globally on natural resources. Head of the office of the president, of course, President Zelensky, Andrew Yermak, has said this: peace talks between Kyiv and Moscow will only be possible when Russia has run out of resources to fight its full-scale war. But again, my question is, who do you think is going to run out first? And that is where the war, that's how attritional war is. It's not the one side is victorious. One side is victorious to the other side being defeated. That is why after attritional war, as far as uprisings, is less common due to the exhaustion than over fast manoeuvre takeover elements. I would like to emphasise once again that only the strong are helped. We must remain strong. Real negotiations for a lasting peace will begin only when the enemy no longer has the resources to continue the war. But then the other side, Zelensky is saying that if this isn't stopped here, then Russia's going to attack NATO, and therefore is saying that the economy and resources are going to be there. So we're just none of this is adding up at the moment. With no military plan in sight to retake lost territories, pressure is mounting on Kyiv to enter peace negotiations with Russia. And I believe we will see that. I don't know. I think we will see Ukraine open to the idea of negotiations soon, but what's on the table, what Putin has offered, I agree with Mearsheimer, who says no American administration would ever accept that because of how it's going to affect how the US is looked at globally. So they're not going to accept it. But at the same time, that Putin's going and has seen that this war is now existential for Russia, therefore may be incentivized to keep going. This is where I say I think the chance to end the war was hard and fast in the beginning. If NATO stepped in probably the end of 22 or right in the beginning, before the war became existential for the Russian Federation, I believe Russia may have pushed back. In 2022, when Russia was on the ropes and, they lost massive numbers, they hadn't yet mobilized, they hadn't sorted out the fucking problems, they hadn't got ways around drones or ATGMs, that was the chance. And if we either armed Ukraine to the teeth or NATO went in, I believe it would have pulled back out, because the longer this has gone on, it's become more and more existential for each country. And we hear this about attritional protracted war. The longer it goes on, the more the state has put into it, both its men and machine and money, that the less and less likely a country is to then have some level of capitulation, that they are going to want to regain what has been invested. It's like a gambler. The more you put in, the more you're incentivized to keep going to sort of win back those losses. So I think we'll see Ukraine, where we're seeing the messaging saying more and more, but I can't see, unless the US accepts a deal which is going to be shocking with the movements on the battlefield, I really don't know if we're right near the end or not. What I do know is this war, whenever it gets near the end, either one country about to be defeated or near the end of negotiations, positions of power, is going to get very, very messy. Now, let's have a look at the maps. Of course, here's Ukraine, the centre, the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. The place I want to talk about first is Uspennivka Ilinka. Remember, this was then being enveloped around here, that there was a pocket formed. Where's my tool? There was a pocket that was formed like this for some months. There's also another pocket here, and there was a pocket around Kurakhove. Now these are now lining up at this point and will start closing, like the one around Uspennivka has closed today, with geolocated footage confirming this, as well as the Ukrainian deep state map. So we have this footage here of these Russian soldiers with a battle flag and the Russian national flag as well. And then this is geolocated. I put the geolocation on the old map just for the time, when I got at the time, which is right on this second road right about here. So confirmation that that has closed up. We then jump onto the Syriac map. Now, he has shown that this was closed up for some time, but he's showing this Sukhuyali River that runs down in here, that Russia has moved a lot up into these areas. So let's zoom in one around here. Russian army took full control of the locality of this, which is this locality, forcing Ukrainian army to withdraw on the north bank of the Sukhuyali River. In addition, Russian forces developing forwards towards this road take control over Syria's positions in the direction of Zelensky and this other area here. So of course, this is that K1, which I won't try and pronounce. So basically saying, see where this element is out in here? What Suryak is really suggesting is that it's something more like this down here and advancing on Zelensky and on Constantinople as well. So a lot of movements in there. That deep state shows some of the beginnings of that as well. So that is interesting to look at and see what Suryak is specifically saying about that. Now we come Kurakhove, you can see that Russia has made advancements in the center of Kurakhove. Now, if this map is correct and there are forces in here, this needs to be very, very protected as a 400-meter gap. If there are forces still in here, I do believe that this has likely closed up like this at the moment, and that the Ukrainian forces are defending the very western outskirts of Kurakhove at this point in time. Now, this map isn't showing this same area, but we showed that yesterday and shows what I suggested before. But we see this is Sontonivskia as well to the north around Stary Turny. More ground has been made towards Shevchenko Mark II, not the Shevchenko we talk about in the direction of Pokrovsk though, and more ground out from Sontonivskia to Russian Army increased buffer zone around this area, as we can see on this map. Now, let's move. This map always glitches on me. Here we go. Come down Velika Novosivka, still showing that there is an encirclement occurring and that Russian forces are pushing further towards Neshkushny in here, of course turning back the gains of the 2023 counter-offensive, which I do think will have a large psychological impact. Although, let's move this map up a little bit, Suryak is suggesting far greater than this. So he is showing there is movement right in this direction, but he's showing that all of this has closed up, that all of it has, right out through Blahatny, which is this red dot here, straight across, that's closed up. That's what he's saying. We'll be interested to see what Deep State shows in a couple of days. Russian army recaptured these fortifications near Novaya Komar, trying to recapture the northern parts of this Novaya Komar. Remember, Ukraine had this successful counterattack in this direction, took full control over Makarivka following the withdrawal of the Ukrainian army. So we're not sure if Ukraine still have soldiers in here or they have withdrawn. Suryak showed for a couple of days they are withdrawing. This isn't showing that. Again, we'll wait on more confirmation of what exactly has occurred. Now, move up. Actually, I'll come back to Pokrovsk. So, no changes up in, Kursk, as I can see. But we can see around Luzova, a lot of ground being made by the Russian forces here. Let's measure this at its most extreme, 3 kilometers, which is a long way. Again, I believe we'll continue to see this unless Ukraine can break through here and reopen logistics routes, because from Izium around then the Oskol, it's a long way for logistical supply into here. Now that Kupiansk, which was supplying out of here as well as Izium, has then been cut off and split into the north and south element. Now, we come down and of course we have Pokrovsk front here. We have ground being made towards Novotrud, out from Shevchenko and towards Novulenivkia too. Remember, Suryak has showed that this area has been closed up for some time. But as well, as you can see, if we zoom out, what I've been saying is that Russia is going to go for Udashny first. I believe in Udashny, cut off train lines, you get more control over positions before movements on Pokrovsk can be made. This goes in line with what Russia does on the envelopments. I believe Udashny and Minograd will be the areas where Russia wants to push on, and we can see it by this forming here, that we'll see more pushes, Minograd, pushes on Udashny, and effectively then start enveloping Pokrovsk and the supply route. So let's look at what Pokrovsk is showing on the maps and then the situation from on the ground. So we then see this. Now this isn't easy to see, but see this Solone, this is right here where there's pushing on the outskirts, so in the same direction, and then towards Zelene right in here too, but not showing these pushing out from Pishani or towards Pishani. So this map is slightly behind what even the Ukrainian map is saying. Russian army in the urban area of Dashansky, it captured half the locality. Russian forces reached the outskirts of these two areas too. So we'll see further pushes, I believe, on the flanks before we see a push on the centre. And there is question if Russia will even have to push on the centre or there will be a withdrawal. And this is from Ukrainian media talking about gaps in defence that Russia is taking advantage of and infiltration of small groups. They accumulate positions, advance to the second lines, the mortar units, UAVs, the drones and fire support companies. Then so these advancing units from the Russian forces, these recon elements, are then forcing then these units, these second-line guys instead of the infantry, to engage in firefights with the enemy. So engage with them in the Russian forces, and then using that as like a lever to move around. This is what I'm saying, is you get these recon elements behind the line that cause havoc, and then other elements move. We've seen Russia do this again and again from Selidov to other areas. And this guy from the 59th Brigade saying a number of people clearly do not correspond to the front line. Instead of putting the new brigade in the defence line and closing the gaps, they threw it into assault that failed. So saying, again, what we hear about manpower and throwing these guys into assaults rather than into defence. Speaking to a guy here, problems with the organisation of defence and gaps in the front line caused by deployed units, saying we are losing our positions following this exact pattern. It's impossible to conduct reconnaissance over the vast area they give us. You can't physically cover anywhere. What happens next? They wear you down and assign you a smaller area of responsibility. But by this point, you have so few resources left that you can't even hold that smaller area. And then they tell you, you can't even handle this. Do you see the absurdity? So saying there's problems in the command too. Now, Shevchenko, which is right in here before Pokrovsk, not the other Shevchenko we spoke about. The east of here is in very poor interaction between units. Capture the village and complicate their situation because now the Russians will be pressing them not only from the south, but also from the west. So this push out and be pressing in from west to east. Saying there is very poor interaction in general between larger units, that is, between brigades, very poor interaction. To be honest, the left hand often does not know what the right hand is doing. This directly affects the quality of combat management. It's one of the key reasons for what is happening. So lack of command and control between units. But then we go into a more sinister thing as well. Often this happens because lower level commanders are afraid to report bad information to their superiors for fear of consequences and punishment. This is a huge issue, and many have said Zelensky is being kept in the dark. What did they say? He's not being kept in the dark, he's being kept in a sauna, or something was said to exactly what the situation is as well. But we have a system of circular insanity. Instead of passing information up the chain to make adequate decisions, there is a reluctance to deliver bad news because it will result in sanctions. And this leads to a negative effect of commanders who accurately report information and challenge unreasonable orders are unwelcome. So if you say that's bullshit or we've lost this many or blah, 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 you can then get in the shit. Instead, commanders who blindly follow even the most absurd orders are promoted. I've come up with a philosophical concept for this, the cycle of douchebaggery in nature. And what I'll say is from the front lines to being on YouTube seems to be the same. If you deliver realistic but bad news without, painting it or putting on your rose-colored glasses towards it, that you are unwelcome and you can get in the shit. And that goes back to what I saw in the very beginning, what I spoke about in the beginning with another YouTuber and TikToker as well. But this creates huge problems. And I believe this is potentially with some of the loss numbers too, that a lot of these commanders, these lower level, may be reporting a lot less losses. So therefore the upper command is, well, they will be able to handle this mission, but they haven't accurately reported their losses. So they think they're sending in a unit of X amount of strength when it is actually at Y, but it hasn't been reported correctly. Future prospects. After the problems in the village of Shevchenko, the command brought reserves to the line, including the 32nd Mech Brigade and the 425th Scala Assault Battalion. However, they were already engaged in counter battles, and now the Russians have managed to gain a foothold 3 kilometres from the city. So again, this is what we speak about. If you are you have the numbers, if you're numerically superior in war, as Russia is numerically superior in this war, that you try and keep your adversary on the back foot by moving elements around. So they were already engaged somewhere, they had to be moved, and that's what you keep, it's just on the run. That's why it all boils down to, I don't understand Kursk. Shevchenko is a fairly important defence hub. It's too close to the city itself. This will help the Russians a lot in terms of work of the sabotage and reconnaissance groups. So once Russia is in Shevchenko, it's only 3 kilometres to Pokrovsk, and the DRGs, reconnaissance sabotage, will be able to move forward. This operational strategic grouping denied presence of Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups in the streets of Pokrovsk. We have seen some Russian pages claim it, haven't had anything geolocated yet. But remember when Selidov fell? That it was, I believe the Russian line was about here when we did start seeing guys on motorcycles, the crusty demons of Ivan, moving up, and that's about 3 clicks. So again, wait and see. That's definitely not confirmed, but there's definitely rumours of it, and rumours have some level of truth at some point. It's like all good propaganda has to have an element of truth, and then you sort of pull on that thread. fighter with the 59th Brigade, who was interviewed, believes Pokrovsk has two options for the future: heavy urban fighting, or encirclement and forced withdrawal of the Ukrainian army. And he's right; these are the two ones. But can Ukraine give the resources to have another heavy urban fight? Does Russia want that, or are they just focusing on encirclement, which is what we are seeing the movements on the maps according to myself? In Shevchenko, the occupiers are about to cut the road to Pavlograd at this rate. If they take it under fire control, it will complicate the situation for us. Pokrovsk is a fairly large city. Can you imagine how many forces it means we need to hold it? Again, the forces that's going to be needed. And of course, we're talking then the roads back through to Pavlograd here, which is a major area, and these roads in here that can supply up. Ukraine doesn't have the amount of men it needs on the front line currently. A lot of them are tied up at another front line, which doesn't make strategic sense to me. I believe there will be a withdrawal of here, like we have been seeing, like Seledov, like Shevchenko, like Kurakhove. I comment on the destruction of these towns and cities is nowhere near what we saw in Avdiivka or Bakhmut, and that is because Ukraine is withdrawing instead of urban fighting. Pokrovsk, I think it will be fought for, but I don't. It is incredibly important, but I believe Russia may want to get that before negotiations too, because of how important it is. If anyone says that this Minograd Pokrovsk is not strategically important, please stop listening to that fucking idiot if someone says that in the future, because then you know that they're just pushing narratives as it suits them. However, it is not known how many reserves the Russians have left and whether they'll be able to continue at the same pace. Moreover, Pokrovsk has a comprehensive defence plan, but the main thing is to have soldiers to occupy the fortifications. We've heard this, and we heard this from the ground too with some of the things I shared. There are fortifications, but some of them built by civilians and in the complete wrong area, and soldiers corroborated that too. But at the same time, you need people there, and there's a manpower shortage. There's a lot of defence lines dug near Pokrovsk, and I'm afraid that if they will not be held, the enemy may not even have to enter Pokrovsk. They will be comfortable sitting in those hundreds of dugouts. According to him, at this stage, we do not see people who can take the defence line. At the same time, Huss believes the Russians will not be able to quickly enter the city. In his opinion, they'll try and bypass Pokrovsk, not only from the south, but also from the west and north from Minograd. The Russian military will not manage to do this before the new year, the aerial reconnaissance man concludes. So will Russia be able to do this before New Year? Not at this pace, at this rate of movement, no. But I don't believe we'll see Russia push right in the centre. We'll see, as we've seen again and again, flanks pushed and then force a withdrawal. Because the problem is, if you don't withdraw, you can then get encircled and lose a lot. And this is what another military analyst and strategist said to myself. He's not public at all, but he said the largest threat for the Russians is that the Ukrainians can level the manpower by cutting off a massive amount of Russians somewhere, but the way Russia is just grinding, creeping forward is greatly preventing that at this point. But if they get cocky and move forward a lot, you could force that. And he was saying, as a strategist, could you entice the Russians to really have a deep maneuver and cut that off to try and level those manpower shortages? Legends, as you can see, I feel a lot better today, but that's purely, I think, the medications that I didn't have yesterday that I got today. But you have a great day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.